Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for being here while there is such a beautiful day outside. I'm here for two reasons. One is to talk to you about what Solid is and what we do. The other reason is to give you a brief idea of the not-for-profit housing landscape in Quebec, because apparently it's quite different from how it is organized in this province, in British Columbia. So I'm the founder and director of Solid. Solid was founded in 2000, so 19 years ago. Its direct mandate, when it was created, its direct mandate and sole mandate is to socialize as much as possible housing from the private park. So essentially purchasing buildings that are presently owned by private owners and bringing them into the community sector. So that's our mission. I started in the social housing domain when I was an intern. I was doing my bachelor's degree in social work, and I was an intern in a community clinic, and my role was to mobilize tenants in the municipal sector against rent increases. And I did that for about 4 months. That went well. We won that fight. And shortly after, I was hired by the housing committee of the South Shore, which is a very small organization. I was hired to work for that organization. Initially it was a part-time job because that's all they could afford. And the housing committee's function is and was to mobilize tenants, promote their rights, promote social housing, and more globally, defend tenants and tenants' rights. So this will give you an idea of the different organizations I'm going to talk about. So such housing committees exist almost everywhere in the province. Most of them were set up in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. Some of them were specifically created as a response to urban renewal experiences or projects in urban centers. Other communities were just created because the tenants needed to be defended or supported or had a desire to organize. But the main trend is defending tenants' rights when there was urban renewal projects. So in addition to those housing committees that are all across the province, you also have housing not-for-profit federations and also for co-ops. So you have two types of federations in different regions of the province. Earlier you saw Stéphane Corriveau, who's the director of the collection of those different federations in the not-for-profit sector. The other thing that we have in Quebec is technical resources groups. So we call them GRT. We call them very often. We call them GRT, and their sole purpose is, their mission has been for more than 30 years now to deliver housing projects, either for not-for-profit organizations or for co-ops, and sometimes even for municipalities. So housing projects with government programs. That's what they do. There's about 30 of them throughout the province, and that's what they do full-time. There's also, Gabrielle, a little bit later, after me, will talk about our organization, which used to be called the Société acheteurs. So that's the type of organization that we didn't have on our territory. We didn't have a GRT on our territory, and we didn't have a federation on our territory. So when I was hired, myself and some activists from the committee decided on a 5-year plan. And we created a 5-year plan which had pretty high objectives, considering that we had close to no resource. Fortunately, we had a bunch of really determined activists. The 5-year plan was to create a good number of not-for-profit organizations, and with each and every one of them, create a housing project. After that was done, we took together those groups, made them talk together, joined them, and they created collectively a federation of not-for-profit organizations. By doing that, they were supporting each other, and they were giving themselves the resources to continue on their mission and to be better at what they do. After that, we created our own local groupe de ressources techniques. So we developed the local capacity to develop housing projects on our territory. Last, we created a more optimal way of socializing housing And that's what we did when we created Solid. So that's when Solid comes into the landscape. So basically, what we didn't have in our environment, we created. And when we created that, we also made sure that those organizations were going to be independent from each other, but at the same time would be collaborating. And 25 years later, those organizations all have different staff, different boards, different missions, but they all work together. They support each other. And when actually an organization has difficulties, you'll see very often the other two coming to support. So it's a hub. It's a collaborative space of organizations where 25 years ago, there was nothing. So that's what we created. And the purpose of that was to change the power dynamic in how housing is done. It used to be that in that environment, only private promoters were dictating the rules of how housing was done. And we were setting out on changing that. Well, we had a small project. So, more specifically about the creation of Solid. We created that because there's a Quebec program which is called Axélogie, which allows groups to develop their own socializing projects. It's been going on for 25 years. For the last 24 years, groups have been worried that it would be the end of that program. Year after year after year, you would never have a long-term commitment by the government that they would actually maintain that program in the next year or the one after. And all the groups that are working on socializing development in Quebec are working in that totally insecure environment. So we thought we need a plan B. If that program falls, we need to have another way of socializing housing. We need to find a different way not to leave people in the hands of the private market. So we created Solid with the purpose of buying existing buildings. The way it works is that, well, we buy the buildings. We manage them better than generally what private owners do. We maintain the rents as low as possible, so they will increase. Rents will increase every year, but far less than what private owners will increase the rents by. So therefore, over years, there's a big difference between our rents and the rents from the private sector. The other thing that we're very careful with is to respect the rights of all tenants. We make sure that every tenant has their rights respected in our buildings, and we put a lot of efforts in that. So how did we do that? How did that happen? Well, initially we started with a fundraising campaign. So we found 500 foundations to which we sent 500 very well-crafted letters explaining our very good project. And after we waited and waited and waited by the mailbox, we eventually received $50. So we thought, hey, geez, how worse can it be? So we decided that we were probably better at everything else than fundraising, and therefore that's what we did. So our next step was we set our eye on a building, a 26 apartment building. We contacted the agent, made a purchase offer, negotiated. They didn't know we had $50, so negotiated, and then we bought the building. We actually agreed on the price. The next step was that we went to the city, and we told City Council we want to buy that building. We have an agreement on it. What we need from you is we don't need land, we don't need money. What we need from you is to endorse 25% of the loan, and the city said yes. So after we had that yes, we went to the Caisse économique solidaire, which is a financial institution that understands social economy, and the scheme became clearer. So we have a mortgage for 75% of the purchase price, and we have a loan guaranteed by the city for 25% of the purchase price. The risk for the bank for the Caisse is almost non-existent, and for the city it was almost non-existent. So that worked well. We lost money for the first 8 years, and we continued buying buildings. We went on our way, and 18 years later, we are now the biggest landlord in Châteauguay. We own 530 apartments in 38 buildings. So I mentioned Axelogy earlier, and I said that all we do is purchase private buildings. Actually, 2/3 of our portfolio is fully private. So 2/3 of it we own, and we're not accountable to anyone but our board of directors for its operation. And we actually can use the equity year after year, and that's what we do. We work with the equity a lot. The other third of our units have been done under the Axelogy program. So there are 6 projects there, 4 that we did ourselves, 2 that were new constructions, and 2 that were purchase and renovate. The last 2 buildings were transferred to us by another not-for-profit organization that was going belly up after 20 years. They didn't want their asset to be wasted, so they asked us to take them over. Solid, I'm going to take you a little bit somewhere else right now. So Solid is a member of the Montreal Alliance. The name is about this long, and I will spare you my botched translation of it. So it's called the Montreal Alliance. It's nonprofit owners from the community sector with two municipal apartment owners from the city of Montreal. So 10 to 12 groups that are working together in a very collaborative space, in a very collaborative mindset, and we're working together to push ideas forward and strengthen each other. And what we're promoting right now is a different idea of how we're going to do social housing. So Gabriel, who comes after me, will give you a very good example of what we're envisioning, because our group is actually making very good success with that formula. So the idea is to not focus on one building in one area. The idea is to buy a lot of buildings in the same area. When you only have one building in one neighborhood, you can only do so much. If you have a lot of buildings in the same neighborhood, you have economies of scale. You actually have social economies of scale. You can use a piece of land of one building to do a project for the other 3 buildings. You can actually have enough people with the same need to actually instigate a program for that need. So the idea is to have enough apartments in the same area so we're capable of changing people's lives in that area by programs, by different interventions. At this point, the Alliance is working on its financial scheme in order to allow us to actually accelerate the level of purchasing we'll be doing, so we'll be able to deliver that vision. After many difficult years, Solid has gone from a very small organizations that couldn't pay its bills, literally, and we went from that to a fairly big organization that is respected in our area. We're now the biggest landlord. Now we have building owners that are calling us. We have agents that are calling us because they want, like almost every day now, they want us to be purchasing their buildings, because now we're being seen as a very serious building purchaser, which is a big, big change from what we used to be viewed as. So being in that position allowed us to make better purchases, and in the last year we did our 2 biggest purchases, and we increased our portfolio by 20%. We added 100 units during the year 2018. That's the inauguration of our latest purchase, and about half of the people there are either our staff or our activists. And behind, that's one of the 2 buildings we bought. So I will tell you about the story about the last purchase we did, because it is, we think, relatively important and significant for different reasons. The first reason is that those 2 buildings, each 35 units, were sold by CMHC in 1994. They were government owned because CMHC took them from an owner who went bankrupt. CMHC owned the buildings, and although people mobilized a lot for those buildings to be transformed into social housing, unfortunately that fight wasn't won, and they were sold to the private market. For 25 years, people were very disappointed about one of their very rare defeats. Then 25 years later, the landlord of those 2 buildings knocked on our door, wanted to talk to me, and didn't put them, because he wanted to sell his buildings, didn't want to put them on the market. He just took a shortcut and came directly to us. So we started negotiating. I didn't tell them that all the money we had would be spent on the previous building. And we started negotiating. And that went well, because at the end of the day, or the month, at the end of the month, it was a bit long, we agreed on a price and conditions. And then we started working on the financial structure of that purchase. I just said that we didn't have any money, so we needed a new way of doing purchase. And that's when we created something quite innovative that we're really happy about. So first and foremost, the most important part is, when you're buying a building, it's not the majority is fairly easy to finance. It's your initial amount. So fortunately, we had a few meetings with the new market funds, and we had an investment in our project from new market funds with their social impact program. Then we negotiated with our usual financial institution and with CMHC, and we used the CMHC the new mortgage guarantee for affordable housing program, which was the first time that we used it. And I think that we're only like the third group in Quebec that uses that program. So we had New Market Fund with whom we had never worked before, CMHC with whom we had never worked before, and our usual financial institution who had to make two new friends. And then they all worked together. And very surprisingly, that's not something you hear very often, everyone was very collaborative, everyone was very willing to work on that project, and everyone really wanted to deliver. And they did. And because they did, well, we were able to buy those 70 apartments. It was really important for us to buy those two buildings, because everybody sees the two buildings. What they don't see, and what we think is actually the most interesting, are the parking lots. Because those buildings and parking lots are located downtown Chateauguay, and they are in the center of the city. And on those parking lots, over time, we'll be able to add 200 new units. And this is actually our vision for the next couple of years. With those buildings, with the new location, with what already exists, what we already have, plus what the city has, plus a co-op, we own everything in downtown Chateauguay except for two buildings. Essentially, we own everything in downtown Chateauguay. So 25 years ago, we set out to change the power dynamics in housing in our municipality, and we did, and we are, and I'm determined that we will. Thank you.